Well, good morning, everyone. We're going to begin our presentation. I'd like to welcome you to the ISO 9001-2015 Preparing for a Successful Transition webinar. My name is Joseph Krolikowski, and I'm the Technical Director of Perry Johnson Registrars. Couple of notes for everyone. All participants are on mute today, but we absolutely want to answer your questions. So please use the question portion of the dashboard, and we will address your questions at the conclusion of the presentation. I'd also like to point out that copies of today's presentation will be available for download shortly after we're finished, and that this webinar and all other PJR webinars will be available for reviewing on our website under previously recorded webinars. Our topics for today, we're going to be reviewing a little bit of where these standards come from, the structure that's in place for developing standards. We're going to address why the changes to the standard were so dramatic this time. We're going to take a renewed look at the timeline for transition. We have an overview of the key changes. We'll explore whether or not it's necessary for you to overhaul your current system. We do have some FAQs from past presentations where perhaps some of your questions may be answered. I have some final comments and then your questions. The ISO, the letters, stand for International Organization for Standardization. And you can think of the ISO as a collective group. They're made up of numerous international members, and their sole purpose is the authorship of standards, and they write a lot of them. ISO 9001 is simply one of their better-known publications. Now, each of the standards that is written by the ISO is assigned to a committee, a technical committee. And in the case of ISO 9001, that technical committee was TC 176. Now, TC 176 itself also includes members from each of the major industrialized nations. And here in the United States, our representation came from the American National Standards Institute, or ANSI. Now, as to why the changes were so dramatic this time, why did we go from 8 sections to 10? Why did risk get introduced? What are all of these changes about? Well, the ISO recognized that the needs of the industry that use ISO 9001, those needs have changed. Those needs have evolved. And so the standard itself has to change and evolve. Obviously, the ISO wants to see ISO 9001 continue to grow and be utilized in as many sectors and industries as possible. Particularly, they'd like to see growth in the service sectors. There was a targeted effort this time around to simplify some of the language that's being used in order to promote consistency and to try to help make this a more understandable standard. And moreover, and this was really a hugely important goal for the ISO, they wanted to improve cross-compatibility between standards. They wanted to try to make it easier for those companies that want to get more than one certification. For example, 9001 and 14001. Now, Nigel Croft, who is the chairperson of the TC 176 committee, when the standard was being developed, he was asked, if you had to express what are the key features that you want the new standard to have? What is it that you're trying to accomplish with the new standard? Nigel spoke kind of from the hip, and he said, these are the 3 things that we really want to promote with this new standard. We want to promote the importance of the process approach. Processes are the foundation of a quality system. Processes are rooted in a systematic approach where things are results-based, things strive for consistency, and so forth. The second item that they wanted to really promote was Plan, Do, Check, Act. And Nigel even acknowledged that these first two items are very, very similar in terms of what they're going for. Plan, Do, Check, Act really is almost an enhanced way of understanding the process approach. But nevertheless, Plan, Do, Check, Act, or PDCA, the whole aspect of having a structured way of planning out an activity, controls for that activity, monitoring of that activity, and then actions taken based on the results of what you have learned. And then ultimately that activity being stronger as a result. Now those two ideas, of course, are legacy ideas. These are items that have been a part of ISO 9001 since the 2000 version was published. Looking ahead, Nigel indicated at that time that the new idea, the new feature, was risk-based thinking. Now, as we'll learn today and go over today, really risk-based thinking is not such a new idea, but in terms of it being a concept, a statement, this is a new idea. So these were the three key features that TC 176 was striving for in the authorship of the standard. Let's take a look at the timeline, and we will start with where we've been. Now the 9001-2015 standard has its roots, as we'll learn, all the way back in 2012, and we'll cover what I mean by that in a second. But the first document that was published of any note was back in June 2013 when we saw the issuance of the committee draft. And the committee draft had a fairly limited distribution, and it was intended primarily for committee members for evaluation purposes and so forth. The first document that was made available that was for public consumption and was intended to kind of get a sense of what this new standard was going to be all about was in May of 2014 when we saw the draft international standard, or DIS, published. Now the DIS was, I would say, approximately 90% or more of what was in that standard was retained in the final standard. It was a good barometer. In fact, there were even companies at that time that purchased that standard and began implementing based on that document. Obviously, that's a very aggressive way to go about it. Looking then to July of 2015, we saw the final draft international standard, which now the percentage was more like 98 or 99%, because in very short order, September of 2015, we saw the publication of the official ISO 9001-2015 standard, and it was available and certifiable. Now looking ahead, we have one final threshold to clear, and that is September of 2018, when the 9001-2008 standard will be made officially obsolete. So by then, any companies that wish to retain a 9001 certification will have to have transition to the new standard. And so we do have our new standard. It was officially published on September 15th, 2015. It is available for purchase in a couple of places, including directly from the ISO. It represents the culmination of nearly 3.5 years of work, going all the way back to the issuance of Annex SL back in 2012. As I said, the clock is ticking on ISO 9001-2008. 9001-2008's official cutoff has been established as September 14th, 2018. PJR, for its part, we have established our own policy on the cutoff for 9001-2008 auditing. We do have that available in the FAQ document on our website. We've also prepared a special client memorandum for any of our current clients. This can be obtained from either your salesperson or your scheduler. In terms of understanding the key changes, any discussion of 9001-2015 has to begin with an examination of Annex SL and what Annex SL is. Now, you may have previously heard about the high-level outline. This was even abbreviated as the HLO, Annex XL. And you're wondering, well, what is that? What does that refer to? Well, Annex SL, as the name would imply, it's an annex. It's a part of a larger ISO publication. And that publication is the ISO IEC Directives Part 1, Consolidated ISO Supplement Procedures Specific to ISO. It is a standard on how to write standards. And Directives Part 1 and Annex SL therein can all be viewed for free on the internet. I've provided the URL here if you are so inclined. And what Annex SL was, it was written back in 2012. It was written by a special committee, and it is a 10-section blueprint for writing the ISO standards. And it provides common terms. It even provides this is how we want this clause to be worded, and then it provides space for the sectors to fill in what's relevant to them. It's a very directive type document, and the plan is for all of the ISO family of standards to be transitioned to this structure by next year. Now, whether that's accomplished or not, we're not certain. That's a lot of committees, that's a lot of voting, that's a lot of standards that may have other things that need to be changed, but that was the plan. Annex SL at this point is coming up on 4 years old, so this is obviously this has been in the works for quite some time. So let's take a look at what the 10-section structure is, and much like 9001-2008, it does begin with 3 non-auditable sections. We have scope, normative reference, and terms and definitions. Now we're going to cover those sections in just a little bit, but let's begin with the let's have a look at the first auditable section, which is context of the organization. And we have some interesting items here, some new items. You know, what is the organization's context? Who are the interested parties? We're going to work our way back to that term. What is the scope of this system? What are the processes that make up this system? In sections 5 and 6, we have leadership and commitment, and there's some familiar items here. What is the policy of this organization, the quality policy? How does this organization define responsibility and authority? In section 6, we have the primary placeholders for risks and actions taken to address risks and opportunities. Quality objectives are here. Planning for change is here. And then in section 7, we have a lengthy section that talks about support. This is where we find requirements pertaining to competency. For communication, we have this new term, documented information, which is a combining of what we used to know as documents and records. So when you're reading through the standard, it follows kind of a Plan, Do, Check, Act philosophy itself. And I want you to think of sections 4, 5, 6, and 7 as the plan portion, the foundation, if you will. These are the pieces that need to be in place for the system to be successful. Section 8 is called Operation. This would obviously be the do portion of Plan, Do, Check, Act. And I want you to think of Section 8 as day-to-day activities, very much in the same respect that Section 7 product realization was in ISO 9001-2008. And operation follows a very similar path in terms of what's in here. We have determining requirements. We have designing products. We have what they call externally provided processes, products, and services. You can think of that as purchasing. Production and service provision, this kind of large section where we talk about controlling what we do, kind of the primary activity. Release of products and services, and then control of non-conforming outputs. From there, we move on to sections 9 and 10, and obviously these would be check and act in the plan, do, check, act cycle. Section 9 is called performance evaluation. A lot of familiar pieces here. We have monitoring and measurement, internal audit is here, management review is here, all of the different ways in which we monitor the quality system. And then section 10, we simply call improvement. And how do we respond to the things that we have in performance evaluation? How do we take corrective action? How do we respond to those issues? How do we achieve continual improvement? You know, all of these aspects. So again, the standard very much follows a plan, do, check, act cycle. Let's dig a little deeper now and explore what are the new content areas represented by 9001-2015. And we begin with risk. Risk is, I think for a lot of people, this is the most unsettling of the new requirements. You know, there's been a lot of chatter about we need to have a risk management program and we need to do this and that. So I want to try to start with just giving you a sense of how risk is viewed, even in terms of how it's been written into the standard. The term risk is used 16 times in the auditable portion of 9001-2015. It's everywhere in the standard. And because it's everywhere, what we've been told is it's a system-wide strategy. It's not something where the expectation is that you have a separate process for risk management. In fact, the term risk management isn't even used in the standard. The term that's actually used is either risk or risk-based thinking. It doesn't say anything about risk management per se. It talks about actions taken to manage risk or address risk. But in terms of saying you have to have a separate risk management process, that isn't what it's saying at all. And it's very much in the same spirit that continual improvement was when the 9001-2000 standard was published. Continual improvement was the new idea back then. And the idea was that, again, this is not something that you have a couple of projects and it's over. It's a philosophy. It's an attitude. That's very much the spirit in which risk is being viewed in this context. So let's take a look at the actual verbiage and see what does the standard actually say. So again, the primary placeholder for this is Section 6, specifically 6.1, and there are two subclauses. When planning for the quality management system, the organization shall consider issues that are referred to in 4.1. Those are both internal and external issues. And the requirements referred to in 4.2. Those are requirements that are coming from both internal and external interested parties. And by doing so, shall determine the risks and opportunities that need to be addressed. Now, I want to emphasize for you this kind of dichotomy of both risks and opportunities, and the fact that the standard includes both in the clause here. And that's crucial, because the idea here is that this isn't just about preventing bad stuff, right? And subclause C talks about preventing or reducing undesired effects. It's also about recognizing an opportunity to improve something or to enhance something, as the standard says, enhancing desirable effects. And those two things taken together get you to what we're talking about in subclauses A and D here. We want to be assured that the system can do what it's supposed to do, and overall we want to achieve improvement. So there's a very broad picture that's painted with this verbiage. The standard continues in section 612, and it says, you shall plan actions to address these risks and opportunities, and you will also plan how to integrate and implement those actions into the quality management system processes. So again, you'll note the emphasis here is this is something that needs to impact the processes that you already have. This is not a case of let's have a separate standalone risk management process, at least in terms of that being demanded. And then you have to have a process for evaluating the effectiveness of those activities. So very much let's integrate this into what we're already doing. Let's have an eye to the future. Let's consider that this can be both avoiding things that are bad and enhancing things that are good. A much bigger picture here than simply risk management. Now, there's a number of things that you are already doing under 9001-2008 that are going to directly correlate to risk-based thinking. And let's explore a couple of those. Let's start with management review. Within the context of a management review meeting, you're already assessing your overall quality system. And recommendations for improvement are supposed to be an output of management review. Well, that's risk-based thinking by its definition. So a good management review meeting is going to help. 7.2.2, review of requirements related to the product. You're already assessing customer expectations against your current capabilities, and you're taking steps to resolve discrepancies. That is absolutely risk-based thinking. 6.2.2, training. You're already assessing competency needs and taking steps to ensure that personnel are fully qualified and competent. And then 8.5.3, preventive action. Obviously, actions taken to address potential problems and ensure that they don't happen. So if you have all of these things in place, you're already well positioned to be ready for this new requirement. Let's continue now with some other changes to the standard. The terms procedures, records, and documents have all been eliminated, and they've been replaced with the phrase documented information. Now, I'd like to point out to you Annex A6, and Annex A6 gives some interesting perspective on this, and it talks about the terms maintain and retain. So whenever you see the phrase maintained documented information in the standard, understand that as a replacement for past references for documents, procedures, or quality manual. Now, there's very few of these. There's only a handful of maintained documented information requirements. One of these is found in section 4.3, where it states that you have to have the scope of your system be documented. Now, retained documented information, that term is a replacement for record. And examples of retained documented information requirements would include Clause 9.3.3, records of management review. Obviously, there are significantly more record requirements in 9001-2015 than there are document requirements. So again, the key phrase to look for either is maintained documented information or retained documented information. Within the standard, all references to product now read as products and services. This really is not a huge change. If you read Section 3 of 9001-2008, it states that wherever the term product appears, it can also mean service, so they've pushed that into the body of the standard itself. An interesting change here, management responsibility has now become leadership. This is furthering the concept that management has to lead and be involved rather than simply directing activities are performed, and it was thought that the term leadership would come closer to the spirit of that requirement. Continual improvement has evolved. It's now part of a larger section called improvement. And again, the idea here is that continual improvement conceptually is one aspect of improvement, but it is not the only way to attain improvement within a quality system. Suppliers are now referred to as external providers. Again, this was intended to kind of accommodate service organizations, but the other aspect of this is brought out in Annex A8, where they explain what it means to be an external provider. And this includes outside suppliers, associate companies, outsourcing. These are all bodies that were addressed in 9001-2008, but in separate places. And so now they've all been kind of pulled together under the heading external providers. An interesting change, 9001-2015 does not specifically require any of the following. It does not require a quality manual, does not require a procedures manual, and it does not require work instructions. Now, we've had a lot of questions on what does this mean? And we've tried to obviously take a very diplomatic view on this and try to reach out in terms of what is the standard going for with this. First of all, remember that the emphasis in 9001-2015 and frankly in 9001-2008 is, can you show that you have consistent, effective processes? And procedures are one way to accomplish that. They are by no means the only way. So as an organization, if a procedure is superfluous and it did not contribute to the consistency of an activity, the standard is taking the viewpoint that such a procedure can be eliminated, and you don't have to have a procedure for an activity as long as that activity is consistent and effective. So that's the way that we have been instructed to view that aspect of the standard. The standard does not include any discussion of a management representative. Another very interesting change. And again, we had to kind of dig into this a little bit, and what is this all about? And the idea is that the organization's leadership team should be primarily responsible for the performance of the quality system. I think it was felt by a lot of folks that too often companies would appoint a management representative, and that management representative would be the only person taking any kind of responsibility for the quality system. And leadership had a very hands-off view of the standard. That's primarily what they're seeking to change with this adjustment. So can you have a management representative? Can you have someone with the title management representative? Yes, absolutely. But we need to be able to see that leadership is making itself accountable. That's the wording that's used in the standard, is leadership making itself accountable for the performance of the quality management system. The standard has eliminated verbiage pertaining to permissible exclusions. It's been replaced with an indication that you can claim something as being non-applicable or not applicable. We will be verifying the validity of those designations at each audit. In practice, it's not terribly different from the current approach. The only change is that now officially the whole standard can be claimed for exemption, but the reality is most legitimate exemptions are going to be the ones coming from sections 8 and a handful from section 7. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the idea of interested parties. In Annex SL, they introduced this phrase, interested party. And the term appears in a couple of different places in the standard in 9001:2015. So let's start with the definition. An interested party is a person or organization that can be affected by, or perceive themselves to be affected by a decision or activity. And there's even some examples that are given. They talk about customers, owners, people within the organization, and then they get into some interesting examples: suppliers, bankers, unions, partners, competitors. Now the standard places kind of a disclaimer on this, and they say, okay, you need to determine who your interested parties are, but you need to consider relevancy to the quality management system. Are these parties relevant? And so again, there's a little bit of a examination of the requirement that's needed. You have to kind of dig in and see, what is this all about? You need to make sure that your quality system is considering relevant inputs. The term interested party is intended to kind of broaden the scope of who those requirements might be coming from. But the reality is, in practice, this is how things are for the wide majority of ISO 9001:2008 companies. Making sure that you are cognizant of applicable requirements, that's simply good business. All right, let's do kind of a sectional analysis now and just kind of identify what's where as far as where some of these questions are coming from. Section 4, as we learned about earlier, who are the interested parties? Does anything qualify for non-applicable? All of that is in Section 4. Section 5, do we have a leadership structure? Is leadership making itself accountable? Are quality objectives consistent with the strategic direction of the company? Has the quality policy been made available to interested parties? Has the quality system been integrated into business practices? In Section 6, have we considered risks and opportunities? Are we taking actions for risks and opportunities? With quality objectives, do we know who's responsible? Target dates? What is it that we're trying to accomplish? That sort of thing. In Section 7, we don't have a whole lot of new requirements. We have the primary new requirement is organizational knowledge, knowledge gained through experience. Also, are we considering trends and looking to the future? Beyond that, there really is not a whole lot of significant new content in 9001:2015 for Section 7. Section 8, almost without exception, is all content that was already present in 9001:2008. Absolutely no significant new content. And that's also true for Section 9. The only big difference here is that Section 9, towards the end of the standard, is now where we find management review. Of course, management review was a little bit earlier in the 9001:2008 standard. Section 10, improvement. Again, no real significant new content, and this is, of course, continual improvement and corrective action. Now, hopefully what you are getting a sense of is that the changes to the 9001 standard, when you look at them collectively, they are minimal and manageable. And frankly, even something like risk is not such a new idea if you consider that preventive action has been a part of the 9001 standard since it was first published. What I'd like to do for everybody now is give you kind of a cover to cover and give you a sense of what some of the non-auditable content is, and especially in the case of Annex A, to kind of point out what's where so that you'll use this as a resource. Section 0.1 is called Introduction. It provides an overview statement, some thoughts on who the standard benefits, talks about risk-based thinking in a preliminary sense, talks about Plan, Do, Check, Act, and it gives 4 key terms, some official definitions. Shall, of course, is still the critical term in the standard. Shall indicates a mandatory requirement. Should is a recommendation. There's actually no uses of the term should within the auditable content. That may be different in other scopes. May indicates a permission. That term actually appears once in the auditable content in section 4.3. And then can, a possibility or capability. That particular term appears in multiple places. The introduction section continues in section 0.2, where we have our first look at the 7 quality management principles, which are given a more thorough explanation in the ISO 9000 standard. Those are listed here. 2 of these have actually been combined from the former 8 quality management principles. The new item, so to speak, is evidence-based decision making. 0.3 is called process approach, reinforces the process approach, and it actually provides an improved graphic. Plan, Do, Check, Act also gets an improved graphic, and it ties back to the 9001 2015 sections. It kind of shows how those play in to that idea. Section 033 is called risk-based thinking. We have a definition for risk-based thinking and some further thoughts on its importance. Section 04 presents the relationship to the other management system standards, namely 9000 and 9004. Section 1 is called Scope. There's some general verbiage there pertaining to the applicability of 9001. 9001, of course, is viewed as being a standard that can be used in just about any type of circumstance. Section 2 is called Normative Reference, and it provides a linkage to the 9000 standard for all official terms and definitions. Section 3 is called Terms and Definitions, but at present it is without content. There are no 9001 specific terms and definitions. Now that may change in the future, but for the moment it is without content. We've already looked at sections 4 through 10, so let's continue with Annex A. Now I want to really emphasize the importance of Annex A for those of you that are going to be reading the standard and trying to kind of wrap your head around what are they talking about and what am I supposed to do. Annex A is a set of interpretations and explanations, and because it's in the standard itself, all of this is binding in terms of this is the official word from the TC 176 committee, from the ISO itself. Annex A1 is called Structure and Terminology. It reinforces the doctrine that an organization does not have to align its documentation to match the standard. And it doesn't have to use the specific terms found in the standard. So for example, if you are most comfortable referring to them as suppliers, you don't have to suddenly start calling them external providers just because that's the term that the standard uses now. So again, the idea here is let's make this palatable and not something where you have to turn your system on its head just because some terminology has changed. Annex A2 is called Products and Services. It's a fuller explanation of intent in changing all references of product to read as products and services. We've already looked at A3 in terms of interested parties and what that's all about. A4 is called risk-based thinking. This is a rather extensive section, and it is where it is made official that an organization does not have to have a formal process for risk management. In A5, we have something called applicability. It's a further discussion on the logic for removing exclusions and the whole new idea of non-applicable clauses. In A6, we have what we looked at earlier, documented information and the whole idea of maintained and retained documented information. A7 is organizational knowledge, and we looked at this earlier, and it's kind of an explanation of what they're going for in terms of competency and ongoing competency, being ready for the loss of longtime employees and so forth. And then A8, which we also looked at, the whole idea of what does it mean to be an external provider, what is it that you're intended to do. The standard then concludes with Annex B, which is an extensive discussion on the relationship between ISO 9 and other publications, and a bibliography. Now, in terms of whether or not you have to overhaul your system, the answer to that is certainly not. You have to remember that one of the goals of the committee was to improve the inclusiveness of this standard. Now, we've got over 1 million worldwide registered companies, and if you tell all of those companies you've got to completely overhaul your system to meet this new requirement, that's not inclusive. So what does that mean from a practical standpoint? If it works, keep it. If your quality manual is doing a good job at fitting your business, you should be able to keep your quality manual. If your procedures are effective at defining your key processes and how they operate, you should keep those. If your quality policy and your quality objectives are well known, adding value, you should absolutely keep those things. I'd like to take a few minutes now and explore some FAQs that we've gotten in past presentations. Beginning with, do we have to have our staff go through transition training? Now, the short answer to that is yes. At minimum, you have to provide transition training. We would expect that you, at a minimum, that you make your staff aware that there is a new standard and that you have assessed the impact of that new standard on the various processes and personnel. Now, it's entirely conceivable that the majority of your staff will feel no effect from your transition to 9001-2015. What about internal auditors? Do they have to go through transition training? What you have to remember about internal auditing is that it's a competency that's required within your system, and it's a competency that is no different from any other competency. Namely, you as the organization are responsible for determining what it means to be a competent internal auditor for your company and what are the appropriate methods that are going to be needed to achieve that competency. So, in other words, you have to decide for yourself how much transition training your internal auditors are going to truly need. If you have a seasoned team of internal auditors who have been auditing your quality system for years, it's entirely conceivable that those persons would be able to complete a period of self-study and successfully transition to auditing the new standard. Now, obviously, the competency of your auditors will be judged by the effectiveness of your audit process, but we will take that on a case-by-case basis. Are the other standards going to be updated? At this time, we have the updated documents. I do apologize that the slide is not fully up to date, but we have in 2016 seen the publication of all three of the major sector standards, TS 16949, AS 9100, and TL 9000. All have been revised and all have been published. In terms of transition timelines, the understanding that we have is that those standards are going to abide by the September 2018 cutoff for ISO 9001. So they'll all be pushing for the transition at the same time. Now that may change, but that is the current information that we have. The only major standard that is not planning to continue its alignment with ISO 9001 is ISO 13485. 13485 2016 was published in March, and it was actually written to align with 9001 2008. We will be providing some updates on 13485 soon, including webinars. Should we get certified now or wait? Interesting question. We have companies that we have been working with that are at various stages of implementing, and a lot of these companies are wondering, is there still value in certifying to ISO 9001-2008? Obviously, we can't decide that for you, but you need to bear in mind that 9001-2008 still has about 2 years of usability left in it. Also, remember that we're still in the early phases of auditing ISO 9001-2015. So again, you would be certifying now and transitioning fairly soon, but perhaps there's value in it in terms of implementing and certifying to a system that is reflective of the work that you've done. What steps can we take right now? Well, in terms of transition steps, I always like to point out the IAF Informative Document 9, which represents kind of the industry's view on the right way to transition. And they encourage a 7-step process. Number 1, a full review of 9001-2015 by the standard. Go through it as a leadership team. Figure out what the gaps are within your system. Number 2, write up a plan of implementation with assigned responsibilities. Number 3, update your documents, including any procedures, to reflect any processes that have been changed or added. Number 4, take all steps necessary to ensure that awareness and transition training is complete. Number 5, perform a full system internal audit followed by a management review. Step 6, ensure that corrective actions are in place for all internal audit findings. And finally, coordinate with PJR for planning of your transition arrangement. Again, I want to emphasize that if you choose to retain a quality manual, a set of procedures, remember that this is supposed to work for you first and foremost. This is not something that should exist solely for the audit. It should be something that helps your system be effective. I would also encourage you to work with your auditors. Your auditors in some cases have been coming to your companies for many years. They know your systems, they know your people. They can help you be ready for a successful transition. We want you to definitely use your auditors as a valuable resource. This is an exciting time for quality system certification. 9001-2015 we feel is a beneficial update to a standard with a long track record of contribution. We will continue to provide timely updates on the transition process, and we will endeavor to enable our clients as smooth a transition as possible. A couple of updates for you on the support standards. ISO 9000 was also published on September 15th of 2015. It is available for purchase. It's the fundamentals and vocabulary standard. It has all sanction definitions, the 7 quality management principles, and some other information. As before, it is not a certifiable standard. ISO 9004 and 19011 for the moment remain at their current revisions. We strongly suspect that 9004 will be updated. Not so sure about 19011, but obviously if those either of those standards change, we will definitely be passing that along. We do have some further information that may be beneficial to you. First of all, we've done a side-by-side comparison, a grid, between 9001-2008 and 9001-2015. That's available for download off of our website. Also, the FAQ report with key questions and answers, also available for download on our website, right on the home page. I'd like to invite you to join us for one of the other webinars that we present. We have a presentation called Critical Points of Review during the Transition Audit Process for 9001-2015. We actually go through clause by clause and explore what's new and how it will be assessed during the audit. The interaction of processes and its importance to a successful audit. This is a deep dive into the crucial topic of processes and how to correctly understand them, how to put together an interaction of processes, or IOP, in such a way that your system is best reflected. And our newest webinar, What to Expect During Your Stage 1 Audit. This is also shown every other month, intended to help you feel prepared for your first official assessment by a certification body. We do want to keep in touch with you, and so I invite you to opt in for future updates by visiting our website at www.pjr.com. At the bottom of the page, you can enter your email and click subscribe. You'll be automatically entered into our database, and all updates will reach you automatically. I do thank you for your time and attention today, and at this time I'll be unlocking the question portion of the dashboard. Okay. Okay, Robert Collier Jr. asks, does interested parties include regulatory agencies like the FAA? I would say potentially. If that has an impact on your product or processes, it is possible that the FAA could be considered an interested party. Ali Ghazi asks, what are the mandatory procedures required by 9001-2015? Ali, there are no mandatory procedures. There are no mandatory procedures for 9001-2015. There are requirements for records, certainly, in several places, but not for procedures. Ali Ghazi also asks, this standard asks for evidence of fitness for purposes of monitoring and measuring resources. Can you clarify this? Is it required to have a piece of evidence for preventive maintenance or only calibration? Well, those are kind of two separate issues, Ali. I will attempt to address each one. You are correct that the standard does require that you have evidence in place to substantiate your measurement resources. All of that is covered in subsection 7.1.5. In terms of evidence, in that respect, it's still very much as it was before. The The standard talks about in 7152 that you have to have, as they call it, you have to have measurement devices that are calibrated or verified and then retained as documented information, which is records. So you still have to have records of calibration or verification for your measurement devices. Calibration as a requirement is virtually unchanged in going from 9001-2008 to 9001-2015. Now, as far as maintenance is concerned, again, separate issue, separate item. I would direct you to look at the infrastructure clause, which is 7.1.3, and it talks about maintaining infrastructure. So again, this is very, very similar to how it was approached in 9001-2008, that being that you have to maintain your infrastructure, but in this instance it's not coming out and saying that you have to have records of preventive maintenance per se. And that's, again, that's exactly how this concept was approached in 9001-2008. Cindy Beatty, I do hope I'm pronouncing that right. Do we need to buy ISO 9000 in order to understand ISO 9001? Cindy, I hate to make a firm stand on that, but I would say no. You should be able to understand what's going on in ISO 9001 without necessarily purchasing 9000. ISO 9000 is certainly a good item to have. You know, if you need to know what are the official definitions for these terms and so forth, but as a mandatory must-do, I'd say no. Are there any further questions today? Okay, we've got a question from my friend Dawn Ives. Hello. Does ISO include customer-specific requirements similar to IATF? Dawn, the standard references interested parties. It does not include customer-specific requirements in the same respect as the IATF 16949 standard. No, it does not. Any further questions? Okay, well, I do thank everyone for your time. Hope you have a great day.